This podcast is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. What if comparing car insurance rates was as easy as putting on your favorite podcast? With Progressive, it is. Just visit the Progressive website to quote with all the coverages you want. You'll see Progressive's direct rate, then their tool will provide options from other companies so you can compare. All you need to do is choose the rate and coverage you like. Quote today at Progressive.com to join the more than 29 million drivers who trust Progressive. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Comparison rates not available in all states or situations. Prices vary based on how you buy.
What's up? It's Kaylee Cuoco. When it comes to travel, we all have a happy place. I just went to my happy place. I just went to Maui, and it was truly amazing. Priceline has always been about getting you to your happy place for a happy price with deals you really can't find anywhere else. Like up to 60% off select hotels in Costa Rica or 5-star hotels for 2-star prices in Cabo.
Go to your happy place for a happy price. Go to your happy price, Priceline.
The following podcast contains explicit language. Hide your children. Hi, I'm Josh Levin, and this is Hang Up and Listen for the week of July 10th, 2023. On this week's show, the Washington Post's Ben Golliver will help us understand Victor Wembanyama's NBA Summer League debut, which included an iffy opening game and a bizarre altercation involving Britney Spears. The Athletic's C. Trent Rosecrans will also join us to discuss the most exciting players in baseball. Elly de Cruz of the Reds, Ronald Acuña Jr. of the Braves, and Shohei Ohtani of, for now, the Angels. And the legendary New York Times sports columnist Robert Lipsyte will come on to talk about the demise of the New York Times sports department. I'm in Washington, D.C., and I'm the author of The Queen and the host of the podcast 1 Year. Joining this week from Aspen, because he's fancy, is Stefan Fatsis. He is the author of the books Word Freak, A Few Seconds of Panic, and Wild and Outside. Thanks for taking some time away from the slopes to be with us, Stefan.
Fancy, and also some friends rented a condo, so we're just piggybacking.
AKA fancy. Have you checked the tennis scores by any chance?
I have not.
Why don't you check them right now?
I'm hoping that one of the scores will involve a certain Greek player.
Oh, it does.
Eubanks! Christopher Eubanks! I was really liking Christopher Eubanks. Stuns Tsitsipas. Wow, to reach the quarterfinals. Sad.
I didn't get to see the final set because we were taping. But in the early part of the match, Tsitsipas was dominating. He, I guess, just could not overcome the incredibly good-natured winning and maybe the lankiest player in the history of professional tennis, Christopher Eubanks, making his first Grand Slam quarterfinal.
I was intrigued by this guy, Josh, because you've never mentioned Christopher Eubanks.
No.
And the first time I saw him play this week was like, who's this dude? And he's good, and he's huge, and seems like a talent. And then I found out he's 27 and was already thinking about quitting the tour. I guess he's not going to be thinking about that anymore.
Yeah, he was an incredibly winning and talented commentator on Tennis Channel, and he's talked openly during this Wimbledon run about how he took on that work because he thought, I'm going to need to quit playing. He's been hovering around kind of 200 in the world. You can't make a living that way. He saw his career as being kind of a disappointment, given his talents and abilities. And he saw this commentary thing as a chance to get his second career started. And the idea was if he didn't kind of improve very quickly, he was going to go into commentary full time. He had kind of a run at the end of last year where he was playing in the minor leagues. He lost a bunch of challenger finals to Ben Shelton, who we have talked about on this show before. But to say that it's his first Grand Slam quarterfinal, I mean, it's his first time past the second round in a Grand Slam.
It's his first time at Wimbledon.
In the main draw. Yeah, he's lost in qualifying a bunch. So it's an incredible story. It really seems like it couldn't happen to a nicer guy. He has Coco Gauff's parents in his box. They've been close, like a kind of Georgia sort of connection. He's a guy who everybody kind of loves and has been around a lot of the top players and has an amazing serve, which, plays very well at Wimbledon, but nobody, including him, saw this coming. It's a great story.
Up next, Daniil Medvedev for a shot at the semifinals. Pretty cool.
Joel Anderson is not here with us this week, but he will be in Washington, D.C. on July 25th for a Slow Burn live show. It'll be at the Hamilton, which is a great venue. We've done stuff there before. There's going to be a bunch of guests. Stefan, you're going to be there, right?
Absolutely.
I will be there if you want to say hi. There's a cocktail hour beforehand if you want to pony up for that. You can find all the info you need about that and about getting tickets at slate.com/live. Again, that's July 25th, Washington, D.C. at the Hamilton. In our bonus segment for Slate Plus members, we'll talk with Ben Golliver of the Washington Post about this newfangled midseason tournament that just got announced, the NBA Cup. Good idea, bad idea, gimmicky idea. We'll hear what Ben thinks. To hear that, you need to be a Slate Plus member. You get bonus segments on this show, on Slow Burn, on other Slate shows. You get ad-free listening. You get unlimited reading on the Slate site. Slate.com/hangupplus to sign up. That's slate.com/hangupplus. Sometimes you go to Las Vegas and weird stuff happens, like the shrimp in the buffet taste weird, or you wake up in a bathtub missing your left kidney, or Britney Spears falsely accuses your security detail of slapping her, or you go out and shoot 2 for 13 in your summer league debut. It's happened to me many times. But for Victor Wembanyama, things went back to normal on Sunday night, or at least as normal as they'll ever be for a 7'3" dude who it seems like everyone in the world is gawking at all times. The 19-year-old San Antonio Spurs center scored 27 points and pulled down 19 boards in 27 minutes against the Summer Blazers. So maybe, just maybe, he's going to be okay if we all just settle down, which we will never do. So have fun out there, Mr. Wembanyama. Joining us now is a man who got very good video of the Hornets' Kai Jones dunking all over Victor. It's our pal, Ben Golliver of the Washington Post and the Greatest of All Talk podcast, which hosted what looked like a delicious meetup at Lotus of Siam in Vegas last week. How's it going, Ben?
It's going very well, and I'm glad you used that word gawk, because in my story about Victor's debut, I used the phrase looky-loos, because that's what it was. It was just hundreds, if not thousands, of looky-loos all trying to crane for the best possible angle at this gigantic guy who is unlike anything we've seen really in the NBA.
I guess we should take this chronologically. So the first thing that happened was the Britney Spears incident, which is a phrase I did not think I would be saying on this podcast, perhaps ever. How did you kind of first hear about this? Was it from like NBA people? The rumor mill was starting about there being something that happened with Victor's entourage and security detail?
No, as often happens, TMZ is all over it. I guess they've just got the spies at various casinos in Las Vegas. I mean, where it happened was outside a very popular restaurant right on the Strip called Catch. And so, even if he wasn't Victor Wembanyama, there would have been hundreds of people potentially able to witness some sort of a confrontation between security. And, in these casinos, everybody's got the cell phones out. So it was only a matter of time before the video came out. It was so funny because I was on my flight from LA to Vegas thinking, like, is this news? Like, do we have to cover this in the Washington Post? I understand, sometimes there's tabloid stuff that we let pass, but they actually both issued statements on it. Victor did, and then Britney issued a statement. So at that point, we're like, you know what? We do have to address this. And within 24 hours, the truth kind of came out. Victor really didn't even realize it was her. She was, essentially trying to get an autograph or a selfie probably, or just to say hi, and got backhanded by one of his securities. I mean, ultimately not the world's biggest deal. The Vegas police decided not to press charges, but I can tell you this. The incident has been... But the
video showed she hit herself, Ben. She hit herself.
Yeah, I mean, and there's a whole debate around that. Is that the right language? Because she wouldn't have hit herself if the police hadn't hit her hand, right? So it's sort of this two-stage process. You can Zapruder the film for yourself if you'd like.
What does Secaucus have to say? What does Monty McCutcheon say about this?
No review on block or charge.
Was it a rip-through? Was it a rip-through move?
It was a non-basketball move, yeah. I would say in the NBA, by their standards, it would be a flagrant one because there was unnecessary contact to the face. I don't think it would have been enough for the flagrant 2 automatic ejection, but obviously, we're making light of it. But it seemed pretty serious there for 24 hours. And you know who's taking it really serious? is Britney Spears superfans, because I have noticed a lot of engagement across all of my social media platforms. When Wembanyama struggled on Friday night, there was a lot of Britney fans savoring him, calling him a bust, saying he deserved it. It was karma for the casino incident. That's why he struggled against the Charlotte Hornets. So who would have ever guessed that a prime source of traffic would be fans of a pop star from 20 years ago? But it was kind of symbolic, right? Like, she's a teen sensation, when she breaks out, sells 25 million records, her first debut album, and here he is, taking over the NBA world at basically the same age, 20-something years later.
Impressive. You've got the record sales facts at your fingertips there, Ben. That was really a good stat call. Do you have someone in your ear feeding you that stat?
Well, like I said, I actually had to write this story, so it appears at the bottom of my Washington Post story. We got it in there.
And I'm looking forward to Britney coming to a game, and they're going to have a reunion thing. There's going to be a photo op. This is going to be great for both parties, I think.
Well, that was the joke, that she should play halftime, right? Because the halftime acts are like baby races at Summer League, so Britney Spears would be a huge upgrade over the typical fare at the Summer League halftime show. It's also interesting, though, because the San Antonio Spurs and Greg Popovich in the past have had this like Belichickian reputation about media coverage. And Victor is very much like of the modern age, wants almost oversaturation coverage, made himself very available to media members throughout the draft week process. And down in San Antonio, he is very, very media friendly. So you sort of have this natural tension here between the generations, where I'm sure the Spurs were just like, how are we possibly involved in a scandal with Britney Spears? And, Victor's probably looking at it like, well, hey, it's actually not that big of a deal. Maybe all press is good press and we can move forward from this. So I do think it's a touchstone moment, in all sincerity, as we look forward to how much Victor we're actually going to be getting here over the course of the next 2 or 3 years, because I think the Spurs maybe got a taste of the dark side a little bit, and I think that's going to be a push and pull in terms of how available he is as he kind of ascends to superstardom.
Let's talk about the meaningless first basketball game that he's played in the NBA. As Josh alluded to in his intro, nobody overreacted. That was good. I'm going to just quote Skip Bayless. It was just one Summer League game, but I must admit, I wasn't blown away by what I saw from Victor Wembanyama. He was well taught. He plays the right way. Astonishing skill for his astonishing height, but I don't see will imposing or obviously physically dominant. And if you can't impose your will on the Charlotte Hornets Summer League team, you might as well just quit, right?
Well, first, let me take issue with this term meaningless, because no one takes a Summer League more seriously than I do. And so if this game is meaningless, then I think my life is meaningless. So I'm just going to say that up front. Second of all, your point on the Charlotte Hornets Summer League team is 100% accurate. One of the worst Summer League teams I've ever seen play. And they have a whole collection of former number one picks, first round picks by Michael Jordan. It's incredible that these guys should be really good, and they're not. They were supposedly the perfect tinfoil, the Washington Generals, to set him up for a big showcase game in his debut, and he didn't deliver. There's no way around it. It was a letdown. In the building, it was the most hyped atmosphere at Summer League that I have ever seen. I've been covering the event probably 13 or 14 years now. I saw Blake Griffin there. I saw Zion there. That was the previous leader in the clubhouse. Lonzo Ball had just an incredible run through Summer League, and a lot of these guys build their fan bases through social media these days, like Lonzo and Zion, and so that's why there's so much excitement at kind of this NBA dork convention, right? But Victor didn't bring it. He was not comfortable. He looked overwhelmed by the moment, and my takeaway from him is he's a very ordered thinker. It struck me during the NBA draft that he showed up 3 hours early, went on stage, and like kind of practiced how he was going to meet Adam Silver. Like, he's one of these guys, everything has to be kind of just right, and he wants to feel comfortable. And Summer League is just chaos. And so that's just the absolute wrong place for someone who's viewing the world like that. And I think it got to him a little bit, the nerves and the pressure. And you guys will remember he first got on the NBA scene back in October with 2 just incredible games in showcases against Scoot Henderson, who wound up being the number 3 pick in the draft. And those games were held in Henderson, Nevada, not too far away. And he was just an A+ in both games. So comfortable, brilliant, did impose his will, did look like the 7'5" scoring machine, right? And the key difference between those games and Summer League was there were no fans. There was only a few hundred fans at those showcase games. Everybody at those games were industry executives, NBA GMs. And I do think sometimes the crowd can get to everybody. And in this case, I think the crowd got to Victor a little bit. And he looked much better on Sunday night in his second game.
He was so good in those Vegas games. And it is impossible to overstate his potential. But I think it is possible to overstate his present. And I think those games in Henderson, Nevada, gave us a misleading impression about his current ability, especially as a three-point shooter. I mean, he was raining threes in those games at an incredible percentage. And in the French league, he shot 28%. You saw he attempted this kind of crazy one-legged shot at the end of the game on Sunday, a three. It did not go in, which most one-legged three-pointers do not. Do you think that's a fair characterization of kind of what we saw in those showcase games and kind of where he is right now with what he tries and what he's able to pull off in the course of a normal game?
Well, I mean, he did look incredible last fall because he basically just didn't miss a shot. And he was hitting so many high degree of difficulty shots that was everybody's first, major impression of him, introduction to him. And it's like, well, if this guy's making these things look so easily, these shots that only a few players in the NBA currently can even hit, and he's only 19 years old, where does he go from here? The thing with high degree of difficulty shots is, even if you're Steph Curry, it's very hard to consistently hit those at a high percentage. I think he's going to be a better three-point shooter like over the course of the next 3 to 5 years than he showed last year in France because he has a really smooth stroke. He's got good mechanics. You mentioned the crazy one-legged shot. He practices that, and I think guys like us probably would have said, what's Dirk doing with this crazy one-legged shot, 20 years ago? And sometimes he's a little bit of an innovator, but he does need to, tighten up his shooting, no question. I think he's got a little J.R. Smith to him. He likes to be a gunner. He likes to dribble. He likes to create off the dribble and just kind of hoist. And I think the Spurs, one of their main jobs is going to be refining his shot selection and his shot diet to get him taking the best, most efficient shots. And for him, those aren't always going to be three-pointers, right? Because he's going to be very difficult to guard around the basket, even though he's a light guy, because he can shoot over the top of defenders. And I thought some of his most successful moments on Sunday night is when he was cutting across the paint, catching the pass, and then quickly turning into shots. There's no one in the NBA who can defend those shots adequately without just fouling him or playing very, very, very physically. So I think he's going to be an amazing scoring weapon, but I do think that we need to lessen our expectations slightly on the offensive end and focus on him more being NBA ready instantly from day one on the defensive end, probably blossoming into a defensive player of the year candidate within the first couple of years. And then with an offensive game that might take a little bit longer to fully flesh out. Maybe the better comparison would be like a Kevin Garnett, as opposed to a Kevin Durant, if that makes sense.
In terms of that development, the Spurs last week extended head coach Greg Popovich's contract by 5 years. He's 74 now. Clearly, he wants to stick around to work with Victor. Your colleague, Sally Jenkins, wrote a column a couple weeks ago about how important the pairing of Popovich and Victor is actually because of Popovich's nurturing skills, the way he has handled foreign players, but mostly the way he respects young players and tries to help develop them into better human beings and oversees things like their diet and their wine selection. I mean, is this a big deal? And how much is that contract, the new contract for Pop, directly related to his wanting to be around to watch Wemby turn into an all-star?
Oh, 100% it's about that. And to release the length details from the Spurs, they don't always do that when they signed Popovich to contracts, and they don't always make a big deal of it. The fact that they announced that during Summer League, to me, was very symbolic. They want to represent this idea of stability and order, and Victor's going to be well taken care of. There's going to be no questions about is Pop in, is Pop out, because those questions have surfaced for each of the last 3 or 4 years, especially as he was winding down his USA basketball tenure. People thought, well, maybe he'll just ride off into the sunset. He's the all-time winningest coach, and he has, what else does he have to coach for? Well, now he's got, Victor to coach for, and I think that's why they made that announcement. Another great thing about Popovich is let's not forget about his coaching tree, right? This is a guy who has developed an awful lot of coaches underneath him. And I think given this stage of his career, the amount of time and effort it takes to coach in the modern NBA in terms of breaking down game tape and the late nights, and some of these coaches you see, they're working themselves to exhaustion. I almost view him almost like the CEO of the coaching staff, right? And he's got a really good coaching staff already. And I think they're going to be really locked in on like all of the minor details in terms of getting Victor's body ready for games, making sure he is developing mentally like you described. And he's a very, very coachable player. His mentality was, I'm ready for any sacrifice that, Greg Popovich asks of me, which is not something you always hear from top picks, so selfless and team oriented. But just to give you a sense for how carefully the Spurs are managing this thing, they actually had somebody whose job it was before the game to bring out towels and thoroughly wipe down the soles of Victor's sneakers so that he was all completely prepared to take the court. And this was like a 30-second process. Probably you can get your shoes shined faster than they were wiping down the soles of his sneakers. So they're being very, very careful with him, very detail-oriented with him. And I don't think he could have landed in a much better spot because he's got so much institutional knowledge on the coaching side, and also by NBA standards, it's a pretty small market, right? It's not in the coast. He's not going to be facing hundreds and hundreds of media members like he did here in Las Vegas. They had to set up an entire press conference room just for Victor's post-game press conferences because there was no other way to conduct all the interviews that he was going to need to conduct. And that's never happened before in the history of this event. So I think, a little bit of a lower profile combined with all that Spurs DNA is going to do him wonders.
Let's end where we started with Victor as a cultural figure and as a guy who's already achieved an enormous level of fame. We saw kind of his first big media moment had nothing to do with basketball. And just curious from what you've seen in Vegas and what you've seen at the draft and other places, how do you think that he is going to kind of get assimilated into the American kind of entertainment culture and just the general American consciousness? I mean, there is this sense that big guys are less kind of loved, less followed, less popular as endorsers, as shoe salesmen. But I wonder if he's so tall that he actually transcends that and sort of becomes someone who kind of in a similar way as on the court, he just doesn't fit into any of our preconceptions about what someone in his position can be and should be. And so I'm just wondering, what are your early kind of thoughts on that?
Before you answer, Ben, let me just say, well, isn't Giannis doesn't he kind of fit that mold?
But Giannis isn't LeBron. Will Victor kind of be Michael Jordan, LeBron James, somebody who everybody who isn't a sports fan knows on a first name or last name basis?
Well, yeah, I think that, judging by this past week, and maybe I'm a little bit too close to it here in Las Vegas, but I felt like he just dove headfirst into the take vortex. It was very clear. Certain people are going to call him a bust after that first game. Other people are going to say, no, he has the potential to be the next heir apparent to LeBron James. Because he's so tall, it does attract an attention from outside the sport. I think my first real taste of that was when I took a video of him arriving at one of the games in the showcase games in Henderson last October, and there was a metal detector that his whole team had to go through. And obviously they're professional basketball players. Everybody else is walking through the metal detector fine. Victor has to duck his head way down so he doesn't hit it on the top of the metal detector that we would go through like at the airport. And just that video alone of being like, this guy is so tall that the world doesn't fit him, got hundreds of millions of views on social media. It went absolutely everywhere into all the craziest aggregation accounts you could imagine because of the gawking factor. And so I do think that he has a very high ceiling in terms of his ability for fame. If he winds up being Rookie of the Year, getting into the All-Star track, he has the chance to be the face of the NBA because that title has sort of been open, right? I mean, we're going through this transition process right now where Steph, Kevin Durant, LeBron James are phasing out. It's more of the Jokic and Giannis generation, but those guys haven't quite captured the public's imagination, and in some cases haven't really wanted to. Jokic is just not interested in that. Whereas Victor, he's a handsome guy. He is very media friendly. He's very savvy, and he's also very ambitious. I think there's some LeBron to him in terms of this idea of like, I want to be a cultural figure. I want to be someone who everybody knows. I want to have worldwide fame and grow my business interests off the court. And he's a very smart and calculating guy. And so I think he's going to be able to achieve a lot of those things as long as he's playing at an all-star level on the court. And, you just look at what he's capable of doing that we've never seen before on the basketball court. And it's a long list. He can block shots without jumping. He can practically dunk without jumping. He's 7'5" in layup lines. He can put the ball between his legs like an East Bay dunk and throw down a dunk with ease. He can shoot three-pointers off the dribble from 32 feet. He yanked a defender with a crossover. It almost put him on the ground yesterday and hit a step-back jumper.
We get the point, Ben. We get the point.
Well, I could go on and on for days because there's a long list of things that he could do. And every single one of those highlights, I think, has the potential just to further his position within this cultural framework, because every time you watch it, it feels fake. He looks like an alien, or as LeBron called him, or looks like a video game character.
You said he's 7'5". Josh said 7'3" in his intro. Officially 7'3.5". Why are you going with the higher number there?
7'3.5" with no sneakers is sort of the official height. He is really intent on saying that he's 7'3". He was asked actually in Harlem during this, charity event by a little kid, and he insisted that he was 7'3". But it's like people who round down with their weight. I think he's just a little bit shy and embarrassed of it.
He's used to centimeters, though.
That's right. And so when you see him next to other people who are 7 feet, there's no chance he's 7'3". He's at least 7'5", and with shoes on, and I wouldn't be surprised if he was taller, honestly. There's really, the only other person I've had the experience of being like, wow, I can't believe how big that guy is, would be Yao Ming. I think that's sort of the natural comparison point among NBA stars of just being blown away by, his height. And don't forget the length too, because when he stretches his arms out, like say to close out on a shot or to reach up for a rebound, that's its own kind of an emotional experience for people who are watching.
Just to note for the listeners, when Ben was illustrating that he reached his arms out, it was not an emotional experience for me to see that. But Ben, your coverage for the Washington Post, your videography of Victor, and your talk on the Greatest of All Talk podcast, all emotional experiences. Thank you for coming on the show.
No, he is an incredible icon for the sport, and I think he's really, really important. And I've gone in as much detail as I can because I think there's sort of a need to do that, like an obligation to make sure we're giving this guy his due. And thanks for having me.
Up next, the Athletics see Trent Rosecrans on the Reds, Elly de la Cruz, and other baseball phenoms. There is no I in team, but there is one in Indeed, and that's the hiring platform you need to build yours. When you're hiring, you need Indeed. Indeed is the hiring platform where you can attract, interview, and hire all in one place. Instead of spending hours on multiple job sites searching for candidates with the right skills, Indeed is a powerful hiring platform that can help you do it all. Indeed streamlines hiring with powerful tools that find you matched candidates. With Instant Match, more than 80% of employers get quality candidates whose resume on Indeed matches their job description the moment they sponsor a job, according to Indeed Data US. Start hiring now with a $75 sponsored job credit to upgrade your job post at Indeed.com/hangup. Offer good for a limited time. Claim your $75 credit now at Indeed.com/hangup. Just go to Indeed.com/hangup and support the show by saying you heard about it on this podcast. Indeed.com/hangup. Terms and conditions apply. Need to hire? You need Indeed. Now that it's summer, you might be looking for wholesome, convenient meals for sunny, active days. Factor, America's #1 ready-to-eat meal kit, can help you fuel up fast with flavorful and nutritious ready-to-eat meals delivered straight to your door. You'll save time, eat well, and stay on track reaching your goals. I've had the Factor smoothies. They taste quite delicious. They also have a bunch of different options for the meals. There's the keto option, Calorie Smart, vegan and veggie, and protein plus. All the meals are delicious, flavor packed. You get different options on the menu each week to fit a variety of lifestyles. And this July, you can get Factor and enjoy eating well without the hassle. Simply choose your meals and enjoy fresh, flavor-packed deliciousness delivered to your door. It's ready in just 2 minutes, no prep, no mess. It's a great meal. You'll love it. Head to factormeals.com/hangup50 and use code hangup50 to get 50% off. That's code hangup50 at factormeals.com/hangup50 to get 50% off. On Saturday in Milwaukee, Cincinnati Reds phenom Elly de la Cruz drove in the go-ahead run against the Brewers in the 7th inning, and that's when the fun began. First, he stole second, and then this happened.
He takes off again. Pitch down and in. Fade throw. There's no chance. 2 steals.
De la Cruz had already looked a couple of times at Brian Anderson, knowing that if he got a jump,
he's going home. The throw. He stole home. The most thrilling man in baseball stole second, third, and home.
He certainly did. Joining us now is the Athletics' Elly de la Cruz and Cincinnati Reds correspondent, Trent Rosecrans. Trent, we would have loved to have you on many years ago, but the Reds have always been extremely boring until now.
I would say overall, yeah. I mean, I have covered Joey Votto. I don't know if you've heard of this young Canadian whippersnapper, but he's been pretty interesting. But I get your point.
Never hitting a pop-up is a thrilling feat in its own way, but not exactly like stealing second, third, and home in the same inning. And we want you to tell us, what was it like to watch that as it happened? Were you thinking in the moment, he must be the first Reds player to steal all 3 bases in the same inning since Greasy Neal in 1919?
The thing is with Elly, so I'm going to rewind, talking about stealing home, to the night he hit the cycle against the Braves, right? The thing with Elly is, he hit this triple. And this is not a good triples park at Great American Ballpark. No Red had ever had a cycle there. There had been 3 total, 2 by Christian Yelich, oddly. But it's a tough triple place. And the thing is, as soon as it left his bat, I was thinking, that's a triple. And the thing with Elly is, he's always thinking triple off the bat. He is really, the tools are unreal, but he's a really smart baseball player. And so after that triple, he tried to steal home and got thrown out because the pitcher caught it quickly enough. It was a similar kind of thing. Joey Votto said he got up and kind of said something to him, kind of apologized. But nobody cares because that's what he brings, because he's going to do stuff like that 10, 15 times. And yeah, he'll get thrown out once or twice, but he's been thrown out, caught stealing twice so far. And he has 15 stolen bases. Once was the one at home against the Dodgers, and then the Braves, sorry. And then the other was when he stole the base and overslid it and came off. I was here for Billy Hamilton. Billy Hamilton was really, really fast and had what we called Billy runs, which would, when he did something crazy with his speed. Elly does Billy runs, but then he also hits the ball 500 feet, and he hits the ball more than Billy ever did. So it's unbelievable.
So were people aware of him? I mean, we should probably rewind a little bit and say that Elly de la Cruz was called up on June 6th, made his debut. He's 21 years old. He's 6'5" and plays, what's he mostly played? Short or third? Short?
They split pretty evenly between him and Matt McClain, who is 5'8".
And he's been insane since he's called up, and the Reds are 22-7 since then. Did he sort of come out of nowhere, or has Elly de la Cruz been a Keith Law top 5 prospect for the last 5 years?
I would say like last year was when people really started hearing about him. I could tell you exactly where I was the first time I heard about him. It was 2000. It was 2 years ago. I think it was after the trade deadline, and I'm in a Louisville hotel room. I'd gone down to see the bats because with my job the last couple of years, I've spent a lot of time in Louisville, Dayton, Chattanooga watching the minor league because there wasn't much to watch at the big league level. And at the time, I got a call from an agent who said, hey, just a heads up, there's a guy you're going to start hearing a lot about. He just got sent from the Arizona League to Low A. His name is Elly de la Cruz. He's a switch-hitting shortstop, and one Reds person said to me, we found our Tatis. Meaning Fernando Tatis Jr. And at the time, like, there were a lot of, like, qualifiers on that. It's like, yeah, he could, I mean, he's not Tatis. I mean, who's Tatis? But it's funny, since then, it just grew. And at the beginning of last year, everybody, like, spring training was like, oh, we've heard of this Elly de la Cruz kid. Then he was in Dayton, and because it was close, we saw it. I was at a Joey Votto rehab game and watched him just put a ball on the street. And it was just this unbelievable power. And you saw the speed. And so everybody starts kind of watching. And then by, say, midseason last year, there's like, this guy could be something unbelievably special. And he went from like nobody, and he was nobody in the Red system, to this could be the best player in baseball. Not the best prospect in baseball. This could soon be the best player in baseball. And I mean, it's a kid that they signed for $65,000 in 2018. And what's really funny about that is I went down to the Dominican Republic to do a story in 2018 because, again, I was covering the Reds. And this was post-trade deadline, and what do? You start to get creative. They've already signaled they're out of it. So I went down to the Dominican Republic, and I started thinking, when Elly got called up, I'm thinking like, wait, 2018, that's when he signed. I was in August, he signed July. And I go through my photos, and I'm like, here's some lanky little kid. I go down, I show the photo. It's Barry Larkin talking to a group of shortstops at what is called the Tricky League, which I never had heard of before I got to the Dominican. It's a step below the Dominican Summer League. And so he's fourth-string shortstop on the Tricky League. I have this photo of this kid with Barry Larkin. And I had seen him, and he was nothing. He was 6 foot 135. I took the photo, and I'm like, hey, Elly, are you in this group? Or is this the group that you came in with? Yeah. And I'm like, are you in this photo? And he's like, yeah, that's me. And he pointed to him like, oh, yeah, that little kid is you. I see it in the face. And but he was the fourth string shortstop, the last guy they signed in that signing period for pretty much their leftover pocket change.
And Zach Buchanan of The Athletic, who got laid off recently, was a brilliant writer who we had on to talk about the San Diego Chicken. He did this really great profile of Elly de la Cruz last year, where he got into the story of him getting signed for $65,000. And I think if you've followed sports or followed baseball in particular, you know stories about Dominican kids and kind of the amount of pressure and stress there is to try to make it in the sport. But in his piece, Zach wrote something that I had never heard of before, that Elly de la Cruz, who's the youngest of 9 children, left home when he was 6 years old to focus on baseball. He moved in with a relative of a coach, and he had all these siblings who had been in the game, including his twin brother, who dropped out at various stages. And at this point, when he was 16, before he signed for that $65,000, he was going to quit himself. He was on the verge. Can you just, based on your conversations with him, like, how does he talk about that pressure, that intensity, leaving home at the age of 6?
You know, and then you go to, he really thought during the pandemic, and you look at the pandemic and how many people were lost, like in the game and where they were. He went back home to his home and started working out because he thought he wasn't going to make it there. Every Dominican player has that pressure. And for Elly, he didn't know after 2020 what was going to happen in 2021. He also shot up 5 inches in that time. He was 6 foot going into the pandemic, and when the Reds next saw him there, he was 6'5", and he had been working out, and all of a sudden, it just blossomed. But yeah, like he thought he didn't know if he was going to have a job in 2021.
All right, before we move on to Ronald Acuña and some other baseball stuff, the thing that is so apparent about Elly De La Cruz is A, he's got a great baseball name, and B, he seems to really enjoy this opportunity, this role. He is having genuine fun out there. This kid is off the chains, enthusiastic, exactly what the sport always needs.
He loves baseball. I was talking to one of a veteran in Louisville, and basically, you guys have all been there, and we do the interview, and then I'm like, hey, my recorder's off. Is this real? And he's like, oh yeah, man. And I was like, what about the show? And he's like, it doesn't bother me. He said, like, I've been around other top prospects, and it gets old, and you roll your eyes. And he's like, but with Elly, it's genuine. He's like, he is at the top step screaming for his teammates if he's 0 for 4 with 4 punchies. If he's had homers from each side of the plate, same guy. And, like, you see it. You see it on those games. You watch him. Everybody smiles around him because, A, they're in awe. And you don't hear top-level athletes like this talk about other athletes the way they talk about Elly De La Cruz. It's like they aren't intimidated because they know they just can't match up. It's like Joe Burrow was out there taking batting practice one day, and I don't think, he wanted to hit home runs, but I don't think he thought that he was going to outslug Joey Votto. That's how these other baseball players are with Elly and what he can do.
And I noticed that Joe Burrow, when he tweeted about his performance in batting practice, he did not refer to himself as Joey Votto. He referred to himself as Joey De La Cruz. That was his nickname for himself. So that kind of shows where the pecking order is right now.
Yeah, that was after his first game.
There you go.
That was the Tuesday after De La Cruz's first game, and that is kind of the impact. That was before his first home run. And I remember that first home run game. He had the home run, the 500-foot home run that we've all seen, and a triple. And I turned to the person I was sitting next to and I go, because the cycle's been a thing here because there had been so long. And I turned to the person next to me and was like, I think the hardest part of him getting a cycle is going to be him stopping at second.
I don't want to upset you, Trent, but I think that Elly De La Cruz may be only the second most exciting player in the National League because Ronald Acuña Jr. is going for the first 40-75 season in Major League history, 40 homers and 75 steals. And then in the American League, you have a guy that our pal Ben Lindbergh recently made the case for being not just the greatest player in baseball today, but the greatest of all time. And Shohei Ohtani.
Ben Lindbergh had said something about Shohei Ohtani? I am shocked.
We love Ben and we love Shohei.
I do too.
You've gotten to see Acuña up close this year when the Reds have played the Braves. He's come back from an injury better than he did before a knee injury. What do you see when you watch him play?
I mean, I just see a guy kind of like Elly, where he just is different part of the game. The speed power combo is so fun. And you have these just electric talents. I mean, those two guys on the same field, it was unbelievable. Like that series, the Reds had played the Braves earlier in the season, but they didn't do it with like Matt McClain, who's another guy we probably should be talking about and would be talking about if it weren't for Elly De La Cruz. But those 3 Reds Braves games were just phenomenal baseball. That was where Elly hit for the cycle. But Acuña is just, I mean, it's a lot of the same things other than not being 6'5" that we say about Elly De La Cruz, but with a more proven track record. And yeah, 75-40. It's funny, somebody said to me that they thought Elly could be, and this was someone who is in the game and knows what they're talking about. It's like Elly could be the first 50-50 guy. You know what? I think Acuña could do 50-50 too. Like between the two of them.
This year.
One of them, yeah. I mean, he could do it this year. One of them could be the first 50-50 guy. And I don't think any of us here would be surprised by that, which is just ludicrous. Because I think we're all old enough to remember like when Jose Canseco went 40-40 and just the awe we all had in that. But these two guys could be 50-50 guys.
I mean, we used to think of Ricky Henderson as someone who had power, I mean, the record for the most leadoff home runs in baseball history, et cetera, et cetera. His best season was 28 home runs with 87 steals. Incredibly impressive, but 40-75 or 40-80, or maybe he gets to 40-87.
50-90?
Those are sick numbers. 15-40-90, 50-90.
Although there's one guy who's come close to that, and it wasn't in a calendar year, but a 162 game spread. And he wore number 44 for the Reds.
Yeah.
And that's Eric Davis. And that was one of the things that, I talked to Eric about, and I talked to some other people about, and like when you're throwing comps around, and you never like to do that. But like with Elly, it's a switch hitting Eric Davis or Mickey Mantle.
With both of these players, Trent, it seems like cutting down on strikeouts has improved their, in Elly's case, opportunity to be a major leaguer, and in Acuña's case, an opportunity to be a Hall of Famer.
Yeah, and I think that is a big thing, and hopefully it's a trend that's on the rise, that these guys cut down on those kind of things. It looked like, when you look at the stats, it looked like Elly was just told, hey, could you stop striking out so much and walk more in AAA? And if you do that, we'll get to the big leagues. Look at his month before he got to the big leagues. It was like, oh, that's what you want me to do? Sure. It's almost like, hey, Elly, go hit a home run. He'll hit a home run. Ronald Acuña, same thing. I mean, there's nothing you can't do. And we're living in a time where, unfortunately, we're seeing kind of the Mike Trout do the Ken Griffey Jr. thing, where injuries kind of pile up, and this guy who's the greatest we've ever seen is maybe not. But then you just look at the talent. I mean, Rookie of the Year this year, Corbin Carroll, that guy's unbelievable. And again, speed, power combo. The athletes that are in baseball with the rule changes, I mean, heck, you guys are talking to me about baseball. And I'm getting this from everywhere because this is fun baseball to watch. Joey Votto said, hey, when I put my this is exactly what I want to see. He joked that, I'm not trying to sell anything here because I have a guaranteed contract. But come to the ballpark, and it's even better in person than it is on TV. And it's just, it's a great experience, and it's some of the best baseball I've seen.
And Davey Andrews and Fangraphs had a really good piece on Acuña, which made the point that with the rule changes, especially around stolen bases, it's now kind of a matter of will and wanting to, and that Acuña wants to steal lots of bases. And if you have the speed, you have the talent, you have the IQ to be able to do it, you're now able to. And I just wanted to ask one last question about Ohtani, who, because he's Shohei Ohtani, has double-digit steals as well as 32 home runs and 132 strikeouts as a pitcher. What are you kind of hearing in the game about what's going on with him? The Angels were in contention. They're falling out of it. There's talk of, $600 million contracts or more at the end of the year. What are people saying about the chances that he could be dealt, which seems kind of beyond belief, or just who is kind of circling around him?
I mean, it seems like it could be the Dodgers, right? They have everything, but he's chosen not to go to the Dodgers already before. Now, spending time with Artie Moreno can always change that. And maybe he wants to get farther from Artie than just in L.A., one county over. From the people I talk to, it's just like, well, here's this possibility, this possibility, this possibility. But in the end, we think he's just going to go to the Dodgers. I don't know. It might be good for the game. I don't care where he's playing. I want to watch Shohei Ohtani. I don't care if it's for the Rakuten Eagles, the Hanshin Tigers, the Los Angeles Angels of Anaheim, or the Los Angeles Dodgers, or the Cincinnati Reds. I think he should come to the Cincinnati Reds, personally, not for their sake, but for my sake. Because Joey Votto, Shohei Ohtani, Elly De La Cruz, give me Zach Greinke at the trade deadline just for fun anyway, and I'm the happiest boy in America.
See, Trent Rosecrans writes about baseball for The Athletic. We're so happy to have you on. Thank you to baseball for giving us the occasion to have you on.
Yay, baseball!
Up next, New York Times sports legend Robert Lipsyte on the demise of the New York Times sports section.
This podcast is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Whether you're driving, cooking, or doing laundry, Progressive knows the podcasts you listen to go best when they're bundled with another activity, much like how their Progressive home and auto policies go best when they're bundled. Having these two policies together makes taking care of your insurance easier and could help you save too. Customers who save by switching their home and car insurance to Progressive save nearly $800 on average. That's a whole lot of savings and protection for your favorite podcast listening activities, like going on a road trip, cooking dinner, and even hitting the gym. Yep, your home and your car are even easier to protect when you bundle your insurance together. Find your perfect combo. Get a home and car insurance quote at Progressive.com today. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. National average 12-month savings of $793 by new customers surveyed who saved with Progressive between June 2021 and May 2022. Potential savings will vary.
Get a new Apple Card account by July 25th and get 10% back on App Store purchases for your first 6 months. Up to $100 daily cash. Terms apply. You can earn on games like Candy Crush Saga and Roblox. Subscriptions like Apple TV Plus, in-app purchases, and all the good stuff. Apply now in the Wallet app on iPhone. Subject to credit approval. 10% daily cash earned on up to a maximum of $1,000 in qualifying purchases. Is valid only for the first 180 days for new Apple Card accounts opened between July 11th and July 25th. To make a qualifying purchase, your new Apple Card must be set as the default payment method for the Apple ID associated with your Apple account in the App Store. You must have a zero balance on all digital Apple accounts associated with your Apple ID. Visit apple.co/App Store for more important offer details.
The New York Times on Monday announced that it is disbanding its sports department. In a statement, Times editors said the paper would scale back the newsroom's coverage of games, players, teams, and leagues, relying for that on The Athletic, which it bought last year for $550 million. More than 35 reporters and editors on the sports desk are being reassigned, and the paper said it would focus on sports enterprise reporting. The move might make some business sense, but it ends more than a century of heralded daily sports coverage featuring titans like Red Smith, Dave Anderson, and George Vesey, and also our next guest, Robert Lipsyte. Bob joined the New York Times sports department as a copy boy in 1957 and was promoted to reporter at age 21. He covered the New York Mets' first spring training in 1962, the Liston-Cassius Clay fight in 64. He was promoted to columnist, left the paper for 2 decades and returned as a columnist again, was a runner-up for a Pulitzer, and won tons of other awards. He's written more than 25 books, including the classic Sports World, the memoir An Accidental Sports Writer, and a shelf of young adult novels. He's working on a new YA novel and writes a column for the Shelter Island Reporter on Long Island called Codger's Column. The Shelter Island Reporter is a very lucky newspaper. Welcome back to the show, Bob.
Well, I'm really very happy to be here, especially because I'm coming here to ask for a job. Some of the most fun that I have had in my career was the year and a half I spent as ombudsman at ESPN. If a place ever needed an ombudsman, it was at ESPN, which canceled the position right after I left. But I think I would now like to be the ombudsman for whatever this hot mess is going to be at the New York Times, because I think it's going to be, number one, very interesting, and number two, it's an incredible opportunity to finally cover sports properly. And you're going to ask me, how would you do that, Bob?
How would you do that, Bob?
I was waiting for you to ask that. Josh, thank you. I think that the issue here, which I find really interesting, is this incredible bifurcation of, on the one hand, you're going to have The Athletic, which does a very good job, better than ESPN in many ways, a very good job in the kind of X's and O's, the nitty-gritty of coverage and what fans like best, which is transactional journalism. Who is going to be traded? Who is going to be hired? On the other hand, they're going to be like little pockets at the Times, business desk, some other places, maybe even culture. Who knows? That's going to cover sports in a deeper way. Now, that part of it is exciting. I'm kind of wondering if you're going to have, on the one hand, The Athletic, which is going to be celebratory, which is going to be like entertainment, basically like entertainment reporters telling us about events that have been scheduled years in advance, promoting heroes. Now that there are no more goats, villains, and heroes, of the old days, who was good, who's up, who's down. Will Judge come back, with his legs intact? And then on the other hand, there are going to be a couple of busy guys who maybe every 2 years are going to find a scandal in some sports university program. That kind of lack of cohesion and that separation is going to be very strange and not very helpful. And the biggest thing that they're going to miss in all of this, and I'm not saying this because I was one, is a columnist. Now, when I started at the Times in '57, there was one columnist. His name was Arthur Daly, lovely human being, and about as right-wing as you could go without falling off the shelf. By the time I left in 2003, there were these incredibly smart and sophisticated guys, George Vesey, Ira Berkow, Harvey Arrington, who really had kind of a grip on what was happening in American society. That didn't last all that long. And as you notice, in the last few years, columnists have been faded out. And the two that they seem to have now, Kurt Streeter and Juliet McClure, really don't appear enough in the paper to give us some sort of coherent opinion about, oh, yes, these last two teams in the Final Four are the best basketball players in the world, and they're all going to be in the NBA next year. So, as I'm saying, I think what a wonderful opportunity with all this firepower, all these really solid people. The guys at The Athletic are terrific. They were kind of culled from dying sports sections all over the nation, and they're really very good at covering teams. But meanwhile, so here you're going to bring in these guys from investigations, from business, from enterprise, other parts of the paper, who are not necessarily sports writers, but they'll figure it out. But will they figure it out in any kind of helpful and integrative way? So I think it's going to be fun or not fun, actually, to watch. What do you think? You guys know everything.
What do I think? I mean, I understand the sort of opportunity here. The Times has already been distancing itself from daily coverage, even of New York teams. They certainly don't cover the ins and outs of the local teams with the level of depth and consistency that they did for decades. And that's understandable in an online world. The stuff does show up online. If you want to know how the Yankees did last night or how the New York Liberty did last night, you can read about it almost anywhere as soon as it happens. The Times has also, at the same time, done terrific investigative journalism and enterprise journalism in sports. So they've been moving away from this sort of daily model already. So for the Times to say that this is some sort of shift where we're scaling back the newsroom's coverage of games, players, teams, and leagues feels a little disingenuous because that's already what they do. The focus is on feature stories, profiles, investigations, culturally relevant coverage. The statement from Joe Kahn, the executive editor, and Monica Drake, a deputy managing editor, said that we plan to focus even more directly on distinctive, high-impact news and enterprise journalism about how sports intersect with money, power, culture, politics, and society at large. I think you're right, Bob. The devil's going to be in the details. Are the reporters who are reassigned to the business desk or the culture desk going to have a different sort of calling, a different sort of mandate than they did working inside sports where you were already doing that stuff?
Well, the so-called beat writer who really knows what's going on, who could have for years told us about Snyder and the football team in Washington. You really can't, because you can't go back into that locker room, into that front office day after day after day if you're actually telling the truth. And that was the advantage for me and other young reporters working for the Times. We worked for a cultural institution that was, in most cases, more powerful than the team we were covering, or for Madison Square Garden or Yankee Stadium. That's not true for most media organizations. So the beat writer has to keep going back in there. So unless there's another layer of coverage on a regular basis, the columnist, somebody who has the unfettered mouth.
I do think there is a kind of inevitability to this. You mentioned the figure in your intro, Stefan, $550 million. You don't pay a quarterback $550 million to sit on the bench, right? It seems like maybe this was fated and we shouldn't be surprised. And, Bob, it's commendable that when you start talking, it's always looking forward. What does this mean for the future of the paper? That you're not waxing nostalgic about the glory days of what the Times was. But will you allow me to ask you about the glory days of how things were? What did the Times sports page mean?
Well, let me go back. I want to answer the glory days, but the first question, you're very right. It is very ingenuous. I mean, the point is that during that period after they bought The Athletic, the only really solid news you got was on European soccer. They had decided to establish their globalization creds. And so it was Tottenham, who I know I'm from the Bronx. I know from Tottenham. Give me a break. But the glory days, so when I came in 1957, most of the guys on the sports desk and the reporting staff were white men, who had washed out of other departments on the Times. They had been just a little too right-wing in covering some communist trial or other. And they were hardcore guys. Some of them took brown envelopes from Madison Square Garden, particularly from boxing promoters. The glory days were our fantasy time, or the fantasy time of the generation before my own. So it was only in the 60s when this kind of wonderful wave of young new reporters arrived. And then afterwards, the sports Woodsteins arrived, and everybody really wanted to be a journalist. And sports writing was a really accessible way in. I came in by accident, but I don't think I would have really stayed in any other department.
Stefan, what does the New York Times sports page mean to you?
It was what I read every day growing up. I mean, I read Red Smith. I read George Vesey. George Vesey was my first sort of model for how you could cover things that weren't day-to-day, who won, who lost, who's starting, who's not starting. And then, Bob, when you returned to the paper in the 90s, I was already a working journalist, but it helped me shape how I wanted to write about sports at the Wall Street Journal when I was a staff reporter there and a columnist there for a short time.
You and I were lucky because basically we worked for publications that considered sports coverage their comics.
Absolutely. But the Times did both. And the Times was also where I turned as a rabid Yankees fan to know what happened last night. So if there were glory days at newspapers that are gone, they were a time where you had reporters who were incredibly good beat writers, but at the same time you had incredibly smart columnists like you and Vesey, and you also had the occasional enterprise story or investigative story. It was the combination of those three. And what I'm curious to see is whether the Times will find a way to replicate that. They say that they're going to be printing stories from The Athletic in the newspaper. So when you need daily coverage of events or games, that's where it's going to come from. I do wonder what's going to happen to like really great reporters like Tyler Kepner, who covers baseball for the Times. Is he going to want to stay? Will he switch to The Athletic, or will he just leave, find some other opportunity?
Well, he'll join Buster Olney, his predecessor at ESPN. A lot depends on who they hire to oversee this. The second 13, 14 years of my career, when I went back, the sports editor was Neil Amdor, who was unquestionably the best Times sports editor probably ever. And he was hard-nosed about both covering the X's and O's properly, but also getting out from under the idea that we were promoting entertainment spectacles. We were journalists. Now, that's going to be hard. I mean, you're going to have to sell The Athletic, guys, that they are now journalists at the New York Times, and you're going to have to sell these investigative reporters that this is just as important as a chemical spill in a river in a town nowhere near us.
Josh, I want to ask you a question, which is you've worked at Slate for a long, long time and been in senior editorial management. The Times did hire Steven Ginsburg, who was a managing editor at the Washington Post, to oversee The Athletic as executive editor. The flip side, though, here that we haven't mentioned yet is that The Athletic hasn't made money ever. It lost $7.8 million in the first quarter of this year. The Times is making a business decision here to try to elevate the profile of The Athletic and consolidate its reporting resources. But at what point does the business part of The Athletic raise questions about whether it is a sustainable venture for the newspaper, and then what?
Well, but The Athletic was not created to be an adjunct of the New York Times. It was this big standalone place that was a smorgasbord. And it was very clear you were not going to read everything in The Athletic, not when they had a single reporter for every team, every American team that existed in every league, in every sport, a big, little, man, woman, whatever. That does not seem like a sustainable business model. It's not going to be. Ginsburg is not going to keep that going. And what is it then going to be? Who's going to make the cut?
Well, it's been in a growth phase. It's grown from 1 million subscribers to 3 million since the Times acquired it. But you saw recently The Athletic laid off a bunch of really talented people. We mentioned him in our last segment, Zach Buchanan, who is one of their, if not their best national baseball writer. He's not somebody who you would lay off on merit. Like, he's a brilliantly talented guy. And so I think they're making decisions now, and you said it, Bob, that they can't cover everything. They're going to make cuts and streamline like every other media business is. And the Times moving their, national reporters onto other desks, as they said in this announcement, it does kind of make you wonder, what is the focus? Who are the kind of lead people going to be that we're going to look at to identify the section with? And so I have questions about that, but we can't be nostalgic and just hope that, like you said, in the 50s, it was a bad section with writers who didn't take it seriously. It's not like everything in the past was better and everything in the future is going to be worse. It does seem like they bought this really huge thing. They're not exactly sure what they're going to do with it. And, we're all just going to, unfortunately, have to wait and see and hope the people in charge know what they're doing.
Yeah, but that 1 million to 3 million, which is always brought up, it got to be 3 million because it's part of the New York Times. And in the history of the New York Times, nobody ever bought the paper for sports coverage. In most of my time, according to all the polls, people bought a second paper, usually a tabloid, for the sports coverage. And then subsequently, of course, the internet, ESPN, et cetera, was the coverage. So it's not about being nostalgic. And as far as your kind of snarky point about, oh, everybody thinks that the old days were better and the new days are going to be worse. Well, wake up, Josh. That's true.
Do you think, since I'm already being snarky, can I get one more snarky point in here? Do you think anyone would have noticed or cared if the New York Times sports page hadn't existed all of these years? I think Stefan would have. I think I would have. But do you think, on balance, the world would have cared, or the world would have been a worse place if the New York Times sports page, if the New York Times decided a long time ago, we're going to leave that to the other newspapers. We're serious. We don't care about this garbage. We're just going to focus on what we do best.
Oh, come on. The New York Times sports page is Raquel Welch's elbow. That's what we used to say in those days. I don't think it would have mattered. I think that, for a few shining moments here and there, Red Smith, a number of other guys here, some really good reporters.
Lipsyte.
It was a nice addition, but it was like movie reviews or any kind of new and clever trending fashion coverage. It was fun. It was it lightened the mood. But people bought, and still do, and subscribe to online the New York Times for Kiev.
You're right, Bob. It's all the news that's fit to print, not all the sports that's fit to print.
That's very good, Stefan.
Bob Lipsyte is a columnist for the Shelter Island Reporter. He also spent a few years at the New York Times. Bob, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you for bringing me back to life.
That is all for our show today. No afterballs, you greedy, greedy people. Our producer is Kevin Bendis. Listen to past shows and subscribe, or just reach out. Go to slate.com/hangup, and you can email us at hangup@slate.com. And don't forget to subscribe to the show and rate and review us on Apple Podcasts. For Stefan Fatsis, I'm Josh Levine. Remember Zelma Obeidy, and thanks for listening.
In moments of stress, it can feel like there's nowhere to turn. The good news is you're not alone, and there are resources to help support you. Health Break, a podcast by UPMC Health Plan, explores this topic with one of our employee assistance program managers, who provides 3 tips for finding comfort and accessing support in moments of stress. Listen now to learn how you can start managing your stress at upmchp.us/healthbreakstress. That's upmchp.us/healthbreakstress.
Hey everybody, it's Tim Heidecker. You know me, Tim and Eric, Bridesmaids, and Fantastic Four. I'd like to personally invite you to listen to Office Hours Live with me and my co-hosts, DJ Doug Pound.
Hello.
And Vic Berger.
Howdy.
Every week we bring you laughs, fun, games, and lots of other surprises. It's live. We take your Zoom calls.
Music.
We love having fun. Excuse me?
Songs. Vic said something.
Music.
Songs. Music.
I like having fun. I like to laugh. I like to meet people who can make me laugh. Please subscribe now.